Okay, so we'll open with prayer. Our loving God in heaven, again, we thank you for this opportunity, for the Sabbath hours that bring us together. There are many questions. Help us, Lord, as we seek for clarity. And we ask in Jesus' name, amen. So in our first time together, we were looking at how the flood is associated with the papacy and Sunday law. We went back to see where the flood has been connected with the King of the North. And judgments and that are brought on the earth and on God's professed people. Before we continue, are there any questions? Then we might move on. And we're going to go to Daniel 9, verses 26 and 27. So in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel is struggling to understand one of the kingdoms. He has always wanted to know the truth of the fourth beast of Daniel 7. And there's also a time prophecy that he doesn't understand. So in Daniel chapter 9, Gabriel is going to come and give him skill. Part of that skill is to give him a start date. So we're looking at Daniel 9, and we want to look at 26 and 27 in particular. They are the end point of Gabriel's explanation. Gabriel is going to tell Daniel that there is going to be a decree. That decree will be a sign for God's people to go back from Babylon and restore Jerusalem and the temple. So in verse 25, we're given the date 457 BC. And from that date, to when Jesus will be baptized or ordained as the Messiah, will be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. So 69 weeks. And that brings us to a date of 27 AD. Baptism of Christ. And it says that after that date, that Jesus will be cut off. He will die. We don't know when, we just know it's after 27. But in verse 27, we're told that he's going to confirm this covenant for 1 week. So this is the 70 weeks. And we're looking at the last week of this 70-week prophecy. In the midst of that week, Messiah is going to be cut off. So that's 31 AD, the death of Jesus. The end of the 70 weeks will take us to 34 AD. Close of probation for the Jewish nation. So with verse 26 and 27, it's going to take us beyond the time of beyond the allotted time for Israel. It's going to give us steps that are repeated. If you look at verse 26, it says, the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city and sanctuary. That prince is Titus. In 70 AD, Titus's people, or his army, will come and destroy Jerusalem. And the end of that destruction will be with a flood. And I'm suggesting that flood is 538. That is the end of the flood of pagan Rome. It begins in 70 AD, it'll end in 538. So this judgment of pagan Rome will continue through to 538. And in end of verse 26, it talks about the end of a war. That end of the war is 1798. So there is a war that goes on from 538 to 1798. And it begins with a flood. So in verse 26, we go from Titus to 538 to 1798. Verse 27 is going to repeat that history. Instead of starting, verse 26 starts with the death of Christ, the cutting off. And verse 27 does the same. Because this is when the covenant gets confirmed. This is the cutting off of the Messiah and the confirmation of a covenant. Cutting off is verse 26. Confirmation of the covenant, verse 27. So we can already see that verse 26 and verse 27, the beginnings of those verses are lining up. That gives us license to line up the remainder of those verses. So this is verse 27 will tell us that the death of Christ was to cause sacrifices to stop. But did they stop? No, the Jews kept offering sacrifices in the temple because they had rejected Jesus as the Christ. A consequence of that rejection is that temple's going to need to be destroyed. And Rome is going to do what the Jews should have done. Rome is going to make sure that those sacrifices stop. Verse 26 says that Titus comes with his army. Verse 27 expresses it a different way. It says that Titus is going to desolate the temple because of the abominations. The abominations are the continuing of the sacrificial system. And so God allows Rome as their tool of punishment to desolate the temple. Same history, different words. And then it says, even until the consummation. Pagan Rome is going to continue desolating until the consummation. This lines up with 538 and the flood. This is the consummation of a marriage. And we would call that the combination of church and state back in the day. Which is exactly what it was in 538. The coming together of the European kings and the church of the Holy Roman Empire. And then it says and that determined shall be poured upon the desolator. So verse 26 says that there's going to be an end of the war where there'll be desolations. Verse 27 tells us that it's the desolating power that gets desolated. Who's the desolating power? It's the papacy. So the history of verse 26 gets repeated in verse 27. And what we're picking up on here is the word flood. Because it's what lines up with the consummation. It's noting the transition from imperial pagan Rome to the Holy Roman Empire. And this history is noted as a flood. We also note in 538 that there are a number of things that make this history stand out. As explained by other speakers, the gatekeepers of Rome are driven out of the city. It was the Goths that were keeping the Roman Empire on course. That were protecting the status quo of the Roman Empire. Once they're driven out of the city, the papacy can fill that void. We also note in 538 a Sunday law. It's the Third Council of Orleans. So in the lead up to 538, the first of the European kings to give their power and authority to the papacy was Clovis, king of the Franks. As you would know, he is the firstborn of the Catholic Church. In 538, Clovis is dead, and France is being ruled by his three sons. The three sons are the three kings of France. And they will allow this council of the bishops in Orleans where they will solidify the Sunday law that Constantine brought in 321. So in 321, Constantine brought in the first Sunday laws. And you had to refrain from all work except agriculture. So except farming. In 538, they strengthened the Sunday law in that they said people had to stop from their farming as well. But they did allow cooking and travel and housework. Those three things Constantine had banned. But at this council, they said those three things are too Jewish. So you're not allowed to farm, but you can cook. So we note a Sunday law in 538 AD. The beginning of a flood. The coming together of the church and the European kings. And then when we go to Revelation 12, it's going to tell us of a flood at the end of the 1260. The 1260 is the war of Daniel 9. And we note that this flood was it was also a war of, we could say a war of propaganda. It was the, what do you call it? It was the Catholic Church's answer to the Reformation. So this was the work that was done in the schools and universities to destroy the prophetic message. So it was a war of methodology to destroy the means to exposing the papacy of that beast of 1260. So this period begins with a flood and ends with a flood. In which case we could have license to recognize the 1260 as a flood. So one of the questions that was given, does that flood extend from 538 and where to? So in the previous study, we looked at the flood that was given in Isaiah 28. That Isaiah noted that the Assyrians would come as overflowing scourge and a terrible storm. And that sweeping away of the northern kingdom continued until 1798. And then we know the southern kingdom is also swept away. And these two dates are noted as the times of the Gentiles. Sorry, is the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled. That is, the Gentiles stop being swept away by a flood. Times because there's two times and two prophecies. So just as we can look at 2520 as a flood that has a beginning and an end, we can look at the 1260 as a flood that has a beginning and an end. If it starts with a flood and ends with a flood, then what happens in the middle? So has that helped answer question 2 and 3? That there is a union of church and state that happens in 538. that Daniel 9:26 is going to note as a flood. And that's going to begin a period. We also note that that date can be connected to a Sunday law and the removal of a gatekeeper. So in the question regarding Daniel 9:26 and 27, the words that are used are showing a transition from perpetual to devastating sin. So I'm assuming those are words that must be in your French translation. So does somebody want to explain what is meant by perpetual to devastating sin?
Sophie, je te laisse répondre.
Comment?
Je te laisse répondre, c'est ta question.
Je sais pas, mais tu dois répondre pour dire qu'est-ce que ça veut dire le perpétuel?
Sophie asks you, she has to answer you, what does it mean as daily? Perpetual for
J'ai pas
us is
compris.
daily.
C'est pas ma question.
Oh, the daily.
But Sophie, tu dis?
Attends, en fin de compte, comme tu m'as interpellée, mais j'ai pas suivi, en fin de compte, j'ai pas compris.
Terrie, Sophie asks you, can you ask again your question? Because she didn't understand what you mean.
So if I read the question as it's given to me.
You mean question 3?
Question 2.
2? Sophie, c'est pour ça que je t'ai dit, je te laisse expliquer ta question, puis c'est ta question.
D'accord, elle veut que j'explique la question.
Yes.
Euh,
La dernière partie.
ok. Oui, alors c'est dans la structure du texte.
So, in the structure of the verse,
Et dans l'explication que Terry, elle en donne,
and in the explanation you gave,
on comprend qu'on passe donc de la Rome païenne à la Rome papale.
we understand that there is a transition from pagan Rome to papal.
Donc du continu du perpétuel au péché dévastateur.
Du daily from the daily to the devastator, sin devastator. I don't know how to translate that.
Voilà. Et ma question, c'était vraiment au niveau, comment je vais dire ça, de la structure. C'était quoi enfin, les mots vraiment sur lesquels on pouvait se repérer pour appuyer qu'il y avait une transition.
So, in fact, Sophie, she would like to know which element in the verse shall she take to show that transition between the two things.
Dans le verset, en sachant que nous, maintenant, on connaît l'histoire, on sait que la Rome papale succède à la Rome païenne.
But us, we know now the story. We know that pagan Rome goes to an end, and after papal Rome arrive.
Mais c'est vrai que dans la structure du verset, c'était un peu, pour moi, c'était difficile à distinguer par rapport aux mots.
But in the structure of the verse, the way the verse has been written, it's quite difficult to choose the words that shows this transition between the two, pagan Rome and papal Rome.
So in the English, I guess it's the verse divides itself up into 4 portions. $31, $70, $538, and $17.98. And maybe that doesn't translate the same in the French.
The thing is, she wants to know which word that corresponding to 538, 1798. I think this is a question. Je pense qu'elle veut savoir quel mot prendre qui montre qu'il s'agit de 1798, 538, etc. C'est ça, Sophie?
Oui.
Yes, okay.
So the word for 538 in 26 is flood. And the word in verse 27 is consummation. And I'm assuming then when you're talking from perpetual to devastating sin, you're going back to Daniel chapter 8. From the daily to the abomination of desolation. So paganism is taken away by pagan European kings because they convert to Catholicism. And the papacy is set up. But that happens because they consummate. A woman is going to ride a beast. The pagan European kings are going to allow this scarlet-colored woman to use them to force their ideology on the people. So we know that when we're using the combination of church and state here, that while it explains this particular point in history well, it's not fit for purpose in our time, because we're not talking about the combination of church and state when we're talking about a woman riding a beast. But this is a woman riding a beast. So daily, would that be the word you're using, perpetual? And devastating sin would be abomination of desolation. That happens here at the Sunday law.
Terrie, j'ai une question.
Yes, please.
Okay, she has a question.
Au verset 26,
Verse 26,
dans la deuxième partie,
second part of verse 26,
enfin dernière partie, quand elle dit jusqu'à la fin de la guerre,
when it's written and unto the end of the war,
De quelle guerre on parle exactement?
Which war is it about?
So we've got two wars, really. Pagan Rome is going to wage a war, and Papal Rome will wage a war. We know during the history of pagan Rome here, we've got the persecutions of Diocletian. That's the Church of Smyrna. And that war continues in different ways through the history there. And then we've got the 1260 is called a war. I guess they're symbols. They don't always mean oppression. Oppression can come through different ways. So, for example, you've got 10 years of Christians being thrown to lions under Diocletian. But after that, you've got different pressures put on the church. That cause it to compromise. So the war can come in different ways. And it's the same during the 1260. It's
Terrie,
not 1260 years of Inquisition. But it is a period of war nonetheless.
I've got a question. Sophie, is it okay if I ask a question?
Vas-y, continue. Vas-y.
Okay. Terrie, why do you bring us to Daniel 9, 26, 27 in the context of the Santalo? Is it to show us a relationship between flood and Sandalo, or to show us the link between Daniel and Revelation, or the repeating story, the three desolation? Why is your target, your purpose to bring us back to Daniel 9, 26, 27 in the context of the Sandalo message?
So when I first shared my thoughts on Sunday law in May of 2024, I used the symbol of Fabius Maximus Gurgis as it had been taught us in 2018, that Maximus Gurgis means maximum flood. And there are other symbols connected with that, so we can place it in time. So wanted to show that Maximus Scourges or flood is connected with a Sunday law. That we can see it in the book of Daniel. As that study started to be dissected by others, which was only right, we needed to test things. One of the issues that was brought up was that there is that flood in Daniel 9:26 is not 538. So it became a point of contention. And that is why at the ICM last year, one of the subjects that had to be revised and hopefully proved was the connection between the flood and Sunday law. Take away 538 and it's one of the proofs that would be destroyed. So in Revelation chapter 17, we know that there's 7 kingdoms, but we're also pointed to an 8th. And we know there's not 8 kingdoms. So what is the purpose of this 8th kingdom? I see a hand, Vadim. I'll just finish my point. The 8th is the beast that was and is not. Who is the beast that was and is not?
Papacy, the 5th.
It's the papacy. So the 5th kingdom, the papacy, is the 8th. And yet we know that the papacy is not the 7th kingdom. But prophecy is telling us to go back and look at that 5th kingdom. The way that 5th kingdom rose to power, how it ruled and how it ended, gives us insights into the 7th kingdom. The problem is we're so set to look at the papacy as literally resurrecting that we've made mistakes on that in the past. But we are still meant to go back to that history and to apply it symbolically or to our time. That there is still information about 538 and the rise of this power that we're meant to bring into our understanding of the 7th kingdom. So it's the 8th kingdom that is making us go back to look at the 5th. And yet we know there's no 8th. And that the 5th will not be is not literally resurrected. So why I had to speak on these subjects in ICM
La raison pour laquelle je dois parler de ce sujet au ICM,
is because this flood of 538 was being disputed.
c'est parce que le déluge en date de 538 est remis en question. Elisa?
So I guess it's not that easy to see in other biblical translations. Oh, it's probably not that easy to see in English either.
Et peut-être qu'en anglais aussi, c'est pas aussi simple de le voir.
So I guess where we started today was to show that there is a flood in verse 40, which gives us license to see a flood in verse 41.
Donc, où nous avons commencé aujourd'hui, c'est que nous avons vu qu'il y avait un déluge au verset 40 qui nous donne la permission de voir qu'il y en a un aussi en verset 41.
We can use flood as a symbol to go back into this history as well as into the history of earlier verses in Daniel chapter 11.
On peut prendre donc ce déluge comme un élément qui nous permet de revenir dans les versets, les tout premiers versets dans Daniel 11.
That give us an insight into how the king of the north will rise up and conquer the glorious land.
Ça nous donne un aperçu de la manière dont le roi du Nord va s'élever et va conquérir le pays glorieux.
And the transition that we see. Vadim, did you have a question?
Yes, I did have a question. Actually, I have now two questions. Chimène, tu traduis? Oui, speak English. Me speak English. Yes, yes. So my first question was, who are the armies of the King of the North, since we understood that the papacy was the King of the North, but now it's the United States. So the first question. The second one, we already know it's related to the Eighth Kingdom. We already know that we have to look at the Fifth Kingdom. I don't understand why would Jean tell us about the Eighth Kingdom to tell us to look at this Fifth Kingdom. So, do you understand my questions?
Yes, thank you, Vadim. So in Revelation 17, I'll start with your second question first. It starts with placing John in a particular point in history. So we know John is placed in 1798, the judgment of the great whore. And then there's going to be this explanation of all the heads. So we're taken from the judgment of the great whore to the sixth and the seventh kingdom.
Et il y aura donc le jugement de la prostituée avec la 6e et la 7e tête.
if we weren't told about the eighth kingdom,
Si on ne nous avait pas parlé du huitième royaume,
if we didn't have verse 11, we wouldn't know that we had to go back and place more emphasis on the fifth kingdom. Sure. No, I hear you. I can hear you now. Thank you. Yes, I can hear. So in Revelation 17, we've got a riddle in verse 10. Tells us of the past and the present and the future. But it's verse 11 that says you better go back and rethink the past. Telling us that the eighth is actually the fifth. Without that verse, we really wouldn't have had license to go back and take extra look at that history. To understand what the resurrection is. So I think without the eighth, we might not have done it, even though we've gone back and looked at everybody's history. And I shouldn't have answered your second question first. I'm trying to remember your first question. Oh, I remember. So the armies of verse 40. Why can't those armies be the armies of the King of the North, the USA? Why can't it use its own chariots, horsemen, and ships? So in the past, we would say that that was the USA helping the papacy. But as we take our understanding of Revelation 17 to that verse, we can see that there's a transition from the papacy to the USA. And that the papacy is actually helping the United States of America. It's the United States that has the well, I guess they both are pushing the ideology of bringing down the Soviet Union. But it's the United States that has the greater vision concerning that. And it uses many institutions under its umbrella to achieve it.
So prophetically speaking, the papacy has no relation in Daniel in prophecy since 1898, 1989. That's what you mean?
No. So the papacy is just another part of the world. It is, I guess, one could argue since the Vatican Council of I'm trying to think, 1960s. Sorry, the Second Vatican Council, that it's been on quite a progressive trend. It's far from having everything correct, but it finds itself on the right side of the argument today. And it ceases to be a beast of Bible prophecy, or a woman of Bible prophecy, I should say.
I have a question, Terrie, regarding this part. I don't know if you will be able to answer that, but I test. If the papacy is not part of, if the papacy hasn't got a prophetic role now since 1989, why do you think that we have, with Elder Tess, all these studies about the counterfeit? I don't know if you have an answer to that, but I just test.
I don't know if I have an answer to that either. But my thoughts are that understanding the papacy as the counterfeit was the key to unlocking World War I and World War II. Without the papacy, we wouldn't have unlocked those two histories. We, I guess, understood that as the deadly wound of 1798, the death in 1799, that as the papacy was resurrecting from that time period onwards, that woman was looking for a beast to ride. And it tried Germany. It tried Mussolini's Italy. Hitler's Germany, and they were failures. So we needed to unlock World War I and World War II. That would give us as much light as the histories of Pyrrhus and the Diadochi Wars. So I guess that's my attempt at an answer. There might be a better one out there.
Thank you. Pascal has her hand raised. She has a question for you, Terrie. Pascal,
Sure,
in
thank you.
English or French?
En français, s'il te plaît. Bonjour Terrie.
So good morning, Terrie.
Bonjour. Good morning.
Donc, c'est juste pour clarifier un point.
Just to clarify a point,
pour être sûr que j'ai bien compris.
to be sure that I understood correctly,
Donc, dans le verset de Daniel 11, verset 40,
in Daniel 11:40,
le roi du Nord sont bien les États-Unis
the king of the north is the USA,
et ils utilisent leur propre armée pour aller contre le roi du Sud.
and they use their own strength army to go against the king of the south.
Et concernant la papauté,
And regarding the papacy,
dans le texte biblique en termes de prophétie, on ne les voit pas.
in the Bible verse, as in a prophecy scale, we don't see the papacy anymore.
Mais c'est simplement parce que dans l'histoire littérale, on a la connaissance de la Sainte Alliance
It's because in the literal story, we have aware of the Holy Alliance.
qu'on sait qu'ils ont un rôle en 1989.
King.
La papauté, pardon.
We know that the papacy has a role in 1989 because of the Holy Alliance.
Et donc, c'est après 1989 qu'ils aient joué ce rôle, que la papauté ait joué ce rôle.
So after 1989, after the papacy play its own role,
Et qu'elle n'a plus de rôle dans la prophétie biblique,
and she hasn't got any role in the Bible prophecy,
qu'on peut maintenant la qualifier de bonne.
that we can now qualify the papacy as a good person, good entity.
Est-ce que j'ai bien compris?
Do I understood well?
Oh, okay, yeah. So in Daniel 11, verse 40, the papacy is there in 1989. And we've got a transition. So it's not that easy to see. But we can say that 1989, the USA is the king of the North. And as you said, the papacy had a part to play on that. The baton was handed over from the papacy to the United States. So at what exact point that happened, it's not clear in the verse. But we know that there was an alliance. And we can now with confidence say that the United States is king of the North in 1989. The papacy has continued to be progressive. Got a long way to go. Like the SDA Church. So it's good in the sense that it is opposed to the Trump administration. It is finding itself on the right side of the issues of today. As far as Ukraine and immigration. Certainly not as far as abortion and women's rights. Although it has been progressive in those areas as well. So I think we're saying the same thing, Pascal. So what I wanted to draw it here is it's Revelation 13. And we know we've got a sea beast. And we've got an earth beast. The papacy is going down and the United States is rising. And really, if we're John, who was also Daniel, because John eats the little book, then our focus really should be looking forward into the United States. That transition began in 1798. In 1989, the USA is King of the North. Even though we can use the papacy to unlock some of the histories between 1798 and 1989. So that we can create line upon lines and that just open up new worlds of understanding. Otherwise, that's a lot of dead history that would mean nothing to us. In order to make sense of that, we needed the counterfeit. So we could understand Germany, USA, the Allies, or, you know, those histories. Like I said, that might not be the only reason for the counterfeit. But it's the one that helps me.
So, Terry, we have a question and also a comment in the chat. So the comment in the chat, I don't really understand it. So they say transition. Revelation 13:12, transition between papacy and USA. Alors, Revelation 13, verse 12. Alors, c'est ce que vous voulez montrer, que la transition entre la papauté et les États-Unis, c'est Apocalypse 13, 12. Est-ce que je comprends bien la question?
Yes, so what
Okay.
Revelation 13:12 is telling us is that the USA is going to exercise that power of the papacy. So this is where we need to go back and look at how the papacy behaved during that history. Because the same power that was used during the 1260 is what the USA will use when it's King of the North, when it speaks as a dragon. So perhaps if I, whoops. Thank you. If I write USA's King of, well, I've got that here. USA's King of the North. (2024), the USA is going to speak as a dragon. And that's when it's going to, this is when we will see the similarities between the USA and the papacy of that period. So the question is, there is no transition in verse 12. All verse 12 is telling us is that when this this second beast will start behaving like the first beast. And that'll be from when it goes from a lamb to a dragon. The transition happens in 1989. And the reason is it's because it's the time of the end. And we can say 1989 is 1798. They're both times of the end.
So David and Dolly, they said, is it the word before him? Is it an important word to understand that transition? Or
sorry, what's
the word before him in English? Revelation 13:12. It said. And
yes.
the exercise of the power of the first beast before him. So they ask, is this word before him shows a transition?
Yes, so the fifth kingdom, the papacy, or the first beast, came before this earth beast. But it doesn't exercise that power of the first beast straight away. But it will do it.
Okay.
When it speaks as a dragon. So you have to go to the end of verse 11. You've got a lamb that becomes a dragon. When it becomes a dragon, it'll exercise the power of the first beast. So we'll note the dragon there at Sunday law.
We will take now the question of Beatrice. She said, could you go back to the time of the Gentile at the end of the 2520 between 1798 and 1844?
Yes.
Béatrice, est-ce qu'il y a un point particulier que tu veux savoir ou qu'elle reprenne cette partie-là que peut-être tu n'as pas compris? C'est ça? Okay. Yes, she said just recap this time period because she missed some things.
So the reason we looked at this is we went to Isaiah 28. And it talks about how Assyria and Babylon come as a flood. And I'm suggesting that the floods, the sweeping away of the northern kingdom symbolically went for 25, 20 years. Because it's not until 1798 that we say that the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And we begin a time of restoration. So just like with the biblical flood, they're bobbing away on a boat in the wilderness of this ocean for a long time. until the flood can dry up and allow them to start again. And it's the same thing happening here symbolically. So that, because one of the questions was, if we know to flood in 538, and we know to flood at the end of the 538, when does the flood actually stop? And I think we could make an argument that the flood is the entire 1260. But it's important to see where it starts at the Sunday law. And the Sunday law is Isaiah 28. It's the Sunday law crisis of, I think it's verse 15, 17, and 18. Just like we would note the Sunday law crisis in 538. That these time prophecies all represent floods, where people are swept away and then there is a restoration.
Okay, so Beatrice continue and ask why this expression time of the Gentile?
Oh, that's just Luke 21:24. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles. So Jerusalem was trodden down by Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Until 1798, the host is restored. God's army, God's church can rise up again. And 1844, the sanctuary is cleansed. So God's people and God's sanctuary get trodden down at the beginning. God's people and God's sanctuary get restored at the end. The Gentiles that do the treading down are the kingdoms of Bible prophecy. So that's just our, I guess, traditional understanding of Luke 21:24. Luke is giving an explanation of Bible prophecy he gives a more literal explanation because he's explaining it to Greeks, not Hebrews, not Jews. So that's just old understanding of our 2520 message.
So
there's a flood followed by restoration. Sorry, couldn't another question?
Time is up, Terrie, and I don't know if you want to continue a few minutes to answer to one or two other questions. I don't know what you want to do. I know it's late in Melbourne.
I'm okay for another few minutes,
Okay.
but I know you don't like to go over time.
No, but we will. OK, so, hormis Vadim, comme il a déjà posé des questions, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres personnes qui veulent profiter pour poser des questions? S'il n'y a personne, on prend Vadim. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres personnes hormis Vadim qui souhaitent poser des questions? Sinon, on laisse la main à Vadim. Vadim, c'est à toi. So Vadim has a question.
Is Daniel 11:1-5 still, do we still have the same understanding of Daniel 11:1-5 as we used to have it before?
Quel point, Vadim? Est-ce que tu peux clarifier?
With the 45th president, for example.
So that's not really germane to the study today. I would encourage you to probably listen to Curtis's studies that were done in Brazil last week, or 2 weeks ago. As far as identifying who the last president of the United States is. And what that actually means. It would take a bit for me to probably go over those verses now, if that's okay.
Yes, the video has been translated, so we will post it next week. So, la vidéo, elle a été traduite déjà, donc on va la poster la semaine prochaine, vous pourrez écouter. So, Terrie, I've got a question. Question number 6 is mine. I don't know if it will take you too long to answer it, or you can just give me few elements. Well, alors, la question 6, I have to translate it in French. Elisa, tu l'as. Alors, how shall we understand July 18, RNC or gatekeeper or gatekeeper? What is the link between the two interpretations given for the date of the Sunday law?
So what are the two interpretations given for the date? So are you referring to like Quintus being number 5 and the understanding of the Republican Party or the Conservative parties as gatekeepers?
Both, because for me, the gatekeeper, I don't know how to link the two. I don't want to confund them. I just want to link them together in the same story. So I don't know how to do it.
Sometimes we can have confirmation of an understanding that doesn't actually have to link. So we were given Fabius Maximus Gurgis in 2018. In 2024, we looked at that man's full name. Previously, we just focused on the Maximus Gurgis. But we could see that there was meaning in Quintus and Fabius. They became symbols that could point us to a time in history. So it was Quintus that pointed us to July. Numbers are legitimate symbols. But on its own, people found it hard to trust in it. We were being pointed to July, but it didn't agree with our preconceived ideas of what Sunday law would look like. So a member is reading a book that is explaining the importance of conservative parties to democracy and how those conservative parties are gatekeepers for the democratic process. That understanding helped us to understand why July was important. Quintus the Fifth made us look at July. The explanation of historians gave us the explanation of why it was July. They need each other. So it's only a link in the sense that they complement each other. So just like the wise men, the magi of Christ's birth, they knew that they were living in a time when something big was going to happen. Just like we knew, the movement knew we were heading to Sunday law. And then to the Magi appeared this sign. There were people that believed in it, people that didn't. But there were those that looked at that sign and they followed it. But their trust isn't just in that sign, in that star. They're studying all the way to Bethlehem. Because there's more information from books that are going to help them understand what they see in Bethlehem. They wouldn't have got to Bethlehem without the star. But there would be people that would accuse them of astrology and nonsense for following that symbol. But they had enough trust in that sign. And as they traveled, the books that they were reading, and they weren't just Old Testament scriptures. There was other information they were gathering. That when they got to Bethlehem, they went, yep, this is exactly what it should be like. And yet it would have been totally against preconceived opinions. Their preconceived opinion would have been to see a king on a throne. And they saw a poor family. So we get signs that point us in the right direction. And then we gather information from historians, journalists, Old Testament. We've got an abundance of information to gather. That help us to establish July. Does that help?
Yes. Yes. Yes, thank you.
So it's not, I don't know what direct link there is. I can't go 5 and gatekeeper. Like there's some sort of tie between them. But one does help explain the other.
Mm.
And I actually think that's really important, because there's something about following that sign to Sunday law because that's how it starts, that's going to help us to see how it ends.
Mhm.
So it's not going to end how we think it is either.
Last question, Vadim. Last question, Vadim. La dernière question, Vadim. I hope it's in link with the study.
Yes, it is in link on the study.
Okay.
It is related to January, the inauguration of Trump. How does it stand? What is it part of prophecy? And if yes, what it is, and if if no, it's no.
I think it's just part of the flood. The deluge it began. We know if we look at the literal flood, that it started raining, but those waters built up over time. Sure, we know that it started heavy, but still there was a progression of the rising waters. And I think that's a part of it. And then it's just been the waters have just been rising ever since. I mean, every day there's just something that's unbelievable. And now we're seeing what's happening with Iran. And we're only 12 months in. Even we're getting flooded with information. Who can keep up with the daily news? It's hard to believe that the world didn't used to be like this.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess, Terrie, we can close.
Thank you, everyone. We'll close in prayer. Our loving God in heaven, we are indeed being overwhelmed with a flood of information. we ask for divine help in navigating these times. Help us to see what is important. Even as we look back in history, there are so many things that are interesting, but it's hard to know what is relevant. Help us to gather up the crumbs that can help us. I pray for this French ministry. Thank you for the work that is done there. Please bless all the members. And we just pray for continued understanding. Especially, Lord, as you know, the problems with translation with the Bible. May you help us to find clarity. So bless the remainder of the Sabbath for these people. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.